Hey everybody, welcome to week one. I hope you're all doing well and that you've gotten through all of the welcome module, including the video. And as I've explained, and as in the materials, each week for these 4 weeks, you will have a welcome to the week video assignment. So what that means is that, like you're watching now, there will be a video that opens up the week. I will bring up any important things that you need to know, and I will also set up the context for what you're going to learn through the week. So that's the main point of this. However, it is an assignment, and there are questions that will be embedded in this that will pop up randomly and or at the end that you will need to answer, and they will primarily relate to the video. So I know that there is a tendency for some students to just want to get through everything. You click through the module, you click through like, get me to the assignment, get me to everything. But it's important that you do the work, and it's important that you go through everything. And even these videos, I was making these videos before I discovered this app that I run this through. And basically students either weren't watching them or they just were trying to get through it as fast as they can. And I was setting up the materials for the week and often providing, if not the direct answers to some of the questions or assignments that were coming up, certainly hints towards, hey, if you're doing this, you should focus on this and be mindful of that. And so I found this thing called PlayPosit that is great, that integrates with just this video on YouTube. I can integrate really anything with it that I want video-wise. And then I can set up questions and they will pop up. And so, so that's where we are. So week one, you had a few little modules that just set up the class, talked about policies, procedures, how to online, from the college, you know how to get to that, and you're here, so you're all good. This week, which is the first week, each week you're actually going to have 5 modules. So let me say it again, and I may say it once more before the end. This class moves super quickly, and there is a lot of material to this class. So remember that by taking this section, you've chosen to take a 4-week version of a full semester class. So it's important that you understand what you're walking into, because ultimately I want you to do a good job at everything. But I've had students get upset with me in the past because I can actually see how many hours you're all putting in online. And so I've had students that they're complaining, they're frustrated, and then I'll go and look and they've put in 3 hours when they should be at 20. And so it's not that I'm doing that to look over your shoulder. I'm doing that to help you, so that if you want to have realistic expectations. So they say that you should put in like 5 hours per module. That means that at 5 modules a week, you're going to be at like approximately 25 hours. That includes reading and online time. But it's important that you're somewhere in there. It's not just random numbers that are made up, and it's not a box to check off time, because honestly, between us, you could just leave Canvas running and it just shows that you're on. It's really about what you're learning in the process. So this week you're going to have an orientation module. So last week you had a few, or last week you might have just been already gone through them. I opened them up on Sunday. But now is Monday morning. Just a quick reminder in case so I don't forget, I will do a little open house thing tonight from 7 to 8 on Zoom through our Canvas class. That's just an offer if you want to pop in, say hi. If you have any questions for me, anything like that, that'd be great. But it's not required. You don't have to worry about it, because I know as an asynchronous class, some of you are in different parts of the world and in different time zones, and so I don't want to put that level of expectation on. I did have a student was a couple semesters ago, who was in Dubai, I think, and woke up super early in the morning just to do that. I'm just sharing that with you. If you want to reach out, you can always reach out through Canvas. You can message me. I do tell you that you got to give me up to 24 hours to get back to you. Understand though that I will try to get back to you quickly. I can get things on my phone, so if I'm out and about, but it could take a little while. Okay, so this week, technically, once you've done your welcome stuff and it's set everything up, You have your orientation module. And so that module has a couple of functions, a few functions. One is to get us all on the same page with learning online. Now, I know pre-COVID, it was a bigger deal. Most people have probably taken at least an online class, if not a semester or a year online. But even if you've had online classes, that doesn't mean necessarily that your instructors or your teachers were taught on how to teach online. It also doesn't mean that you were necessarily taught on how to learn online. So there is some online readiness modules that I want you to read through so that it will help you to be successful. And it's really solid information, not just for this class, but really for everything going forward. There may be things in there that you're like, wow, I didn't even realize that. And all of these things you will be asked about. So I need to like stare over at my laptop for a second, just so I don't leave anything out. But we have let's see here. Yeah, so we have how to use Canvas. We have how to work online. We have Netiquette, which is just a little page on internet etiquette, which, especially with COVID, we've seen that just blow up in horrific ways. But there is a way to treat people, and good ways and bad ways. And so I'll have you learn a little bit about netiquette. I'm going to have you learn a bit about how we learn and effective study habits, because sometimes people maybe you've never been taught how we actually learn. There are some people that have learned that, there's different people have different learning styles. That's not actually true. We have different maybe learning preferences, but it's not the truth to where when you hear people say, oh, he's a visual learner or she's a visual learner or whatever, that they learn best visual. There's actually no data that backs that up. We may have preferences that we like to learn that way, but the science doesn't back up that. And so you're going to learn a bit about how we learn, the different things that you can do in terms of repetition, in terms of spacing out lessons. You're going to learn, I think there's about 6 things. You're going to be asked about these as well, so on assignments. And then you're going to learn about what we call neural nostalgia. Nostalgia is just sort of a longing for the past, but nostalgia plays a role in why we learn and what we learn and what sticks with us as we develop and grow. And that plays a big factor in this class in particular, because the music that you grow up with will implant itself into you, and it will be your favorite music for your whole life, largely. And there's reasons for that. There's scientific reasons for that. So you're going to learn about the role that it plays, and then you'll have a chance to think about like, oh, well, that's why I like this. Now, the ages in this summer class could be anywhere from, you could be 15 or 16 all the way up into 70 or 80. And so really, how things develop. Sometimes I have students who say, well, I'm still developing my favorite music, and that could very well be true. So you're going to learn about that. And then we're going to jump into the material. So you're going to have your orientation, and then we're going to have 4 weeks of materials. Now, typically in my normal 16-week class, I make a video like this for every week, and each video tends to be somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes long. That's just for 1 to 2 chapters. Now we have 4 to 5, so you think, oh, these are going to be like an hour long, but they're not going to be, because I want you to learn, but they might be 15, 20, 30 minutes long, depending on all the material that I have to go over, the things that I have to set up to prepare you to be ready to learn well. So, a couple of things. So we have chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Chapter 1 is the roots of rock music. Chapter 2 is urban blues and rhythm and blues, then country and gospel roots, and then we get to rock and roll in chapter 4. And so you're going to actually jump back in time to pre-Civil War to learn a little bit. You're going to learn about Stephen Foster, and you're going to learn about folk music. And so real quick, there are 4 types of music, just to set up a context for this class. 4 broad types. So you have what we call cultural ritual music. That is music that takes place in all cultures and is often connected with some extra musical function. So could be birth, could be death, could be weddings, could be war, could be worship, all of these things, and every culture has this. Then there is folk music, and there is some overlap with folk and cultural ritual. And so with folk music, while it may have aspects of the other styles, it also primarily has a social function. So not every culture has folk music, but most of them do. And that could be not just some of the things that I mentioned before, but it also could be music just for entertainment's sake. When people were working out on the farms or working out on the plantations, and they would come back at the end of the day and they would sit down and they would play music to relax, to entertain themselves, to dance. That is more folk music. And then we're going to learn about specific folk music in terms of the popular streams when we get down the chapter. I think it's chapter 9 or something like that. But there's folk music. There is art music, which many of you may know the term classical music. When we think of classical music, you might think of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Tchaikovsky and people like that. I prefer to use the term art music because classical music, my degrees are in classical music, and classical music actually refers to a very specific time and a very specific culture, which is Western European art music from 1750 to 1830, somewhere in there. And so I like the term art music. Art music does not exist in all cultures. Art music is usually written for people that are educated. It is typically written to edify, to sort of lift one up emotionally and or intellectually. It is often created by one composer and written down and performed, although not all cultures write it down, not everything. And so that would be what we would call a notational history of music. And but a lot of the music, except for art music, is what we call aural, A-U-R-A-L. So there is an oral tradition, and it is learned orally, meaning through the ear. Also, I just remembered in the orientation module, I did also add one thing this time around, which is just a basic short video on song structures and what makes up songs between verses, chorus, bridge, just so that you have a common foundation as we go into this. So we talked about cultural ritual music, folk music, art music, and then we have popular music. Popular music is primarily created to make money. It is primarily created for large audiences, and popular music exists in not all cultures, but many cultures. There was popular music before there was recordings, and this is something I want you to be mindful of. But there was popular music. You watch the old westerns where they would come in and there'd be a guy playing a honky tonk piano or whatever. That was popular music. And so the difference between folk music and pop music, which can be gray sometimes, has a lot to do with the economic factor in it. So the music that we're going to be learning in this class, even though it's called rock music history and appreciation, it's more broad than that. It's really popular music history and appreciation. Rock and roll, and then rock is just a little slice of that. So that's the focus of this class, is on popular music. So like I said, you're going to learn about Stephen Foster, and that's pre-Civil War. Then after the Civil War, you're going to learn about ragtime and Scott Joplin, and then we're going to get into jazz and into blues, and and then carry on through. That's kind of largely chapter 1. There is something that's important about this class, and it's an interesting thing. We talk about race, and race has been certainly at a heightened level in the last few years. Not as heightened as it was in the 60s, and not as heightened as it has been in other times, but it's certainly out there. We have kind of a skewed perspective of it because of social media. And the way that information is aggregated and presented to us. So we can really find whatever information we want, and it gets fed to us, and then we kind of live in our own silos. But race has always been a factor in all cultures, in all times. It's not a Western thing. It's not an American thing. It's a human thing. But it plays a significant role in this particular class because the roots of rock and roll, of rock music, really come from Black music and European music, and how they come together. And the way that they come together, largely in the context of this class, with as we move through, is through the slave trade. So there's, that there is some discussion of that. Obviously, it was a horrible, horrible thing. And slavery also was not unique to this culture. It was not unique to this time. It has been with us. Wherever you have people in power, you have people that are going to take advantage of those that are not in power, sadly. And so it plays a big role here. And so it's important to understand that there's a lot of, I'm not going to get into a big discussion about all of this, but it's important to have a general understanding. And of course, you can certainly look things up online and all of that. But it's important to understand that, the slave trade started here in the 1600s. And when you had the British and the Dutch and the French, and then as they were basically colonizing North America, there's this, sometimes we get confused or misled, or maybe we don't know that, the Americans brought the slaves over, and it was a British colony actually back then. And so when you look at how this goes, back then there was a slave trade that what happened was that they took a lot of people, they were sold into slavery in West Africa, and they were then transported across the Atlantic. Many of them, most of them actually ended up in South America, in Brazil and in other countries there, and then through the slave route up through the Caribbean. And so then you had them getting into Cuba and Jamaica and Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then eventually into the South. And there was a whole economy based upon this, really horrid practice. And just so that we're all clear, so that we understand this, and this is not saying this to sort of write it off as history, there is still a slave trade today. And it's important to understand that this still goes on underneath our watch. Maybe we don't see it, or maybe we choose not to see it, but it is still out there. Maybe some of you saw the story, I think it was a week or two ago, about the immigrants that died in the trucks that were being brought over here. And a lot of that is just about money and commerce, and the people that are bringing them over don't necessarily have their best interests at heart. And then of course there is the sex trade, and that is a global problem as well. So how does that all relate to us? Well, how it relates to us is that when you have the slaves that were brought here to primarily the South, they brought their music with them, many of whom were not allowed to practice their own music. There was a place in New Orleans, a place called Congo Square, where on Sundays they were allowed to congregate and, at least for a while, perform the music of their cultures. But largely that was kind of wiped out. And what you would have, those the influences of the music that they heard in Africa, which was primarily a rhythmic music, combined with the harmonies of Western music that they would hear in music that came over from England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales. And so they would hear these musics, they would hear it in church, they would hear them playing it in the homes. And then you get the combination, and out of those combinations, and then also even some influences of classical, is where you get to ragtime, which leads to jazz. And then you also have a blues tradition, and then you have a folk tradition, more closely European folk tradition of ballad songs and things that were brought over at the same time. So you'll learn about that too as we go through this class. So it's important to understand that all of this is intertwined, and that we don't get out of it. And when you learn about the music in the 60s, it's important when we get there to understand that the civil rights movement, Vietnam War, all these things that were happening, they all played a role in the music that was made, because they were part of the culture in which the music was made. So I hope that all makes sense. So it's a sad, awful part of history, but it's there, and we have to deal with it and figure out, how do we reconcile it with the things that we learn. And the truth is that, sometimes horrific things can bring out good things, not in justifying it and not minimizing the horrific things, though. I think that that's important to figure out, how we wrestle with that and how we deal with it, because we can't change it because it's the past. But we can try to figure out, one, how to not do it again, and two, how to put it in its proper perspective. So you have to realize as we go through this class that race always plays a role. It's even into the early 80s, even into MTV and into the 90s. And if you think about music now, you could think about styles or genres that are primarily black or primarily white. Now, they're not being imposed upon people, but that's a factor. And so just keep that in your mind as you're going through this class, because it's part of the human condition. And so it's important that we be aware of that. Okay, enough proselytizing. So we learn about the genres that I talked about, and then there's a couple other important factors. One of them is the war, the wars, I should say. So in your mind, it's good to know the approximate dates of some of the significant wars in this class, particularly World War II, which is 1914 to 1918. I'm sorry, World War One. World War One, which is 1914 to 1918. World War II, which is 1939 to 1945. And we became involved in World War II December 7th, 1941. You have the Korean War in the late 50s, and then you have the Vietnam War, which was started as a police action. Actually, Korean War was more early mid 50s. Then you have the Vietnam War, which began in the late 50s, really came to a full head in the 60s and into the early 70s, before it ended in the early 70s. And so all of those things play a significant role as well in this class. And it's mindful because a number of things happen. Wars bring changes in technology. Wars bring changes in populations. And so all of those things will be impacted in this class. So for example, after World War I, you have, ends in 1918, people come back. It changes the landscape. Number of people, obviously many people died in that war, many more in Europe than here. But then you have, and actually I didn't even mention really the Civil War, which is 1861 to 1865. And so after that, and then, we've all become more aware of Juneteenth and when the slaves in Texas were basically notified, hey, by the way, this thing's over. But then populations change because they're free to go. Some choose not to, some choose to stay on, because of, whether it's family or life or work or whatever, but many left. And so there's a big movement in the early 20th century, both as a result of World War I and World War II, where you have big movements out of the South into the bigger cities. So you have movements into Kansas City, into Chicago, into New York, and into St. Louis. And so as a result of these, you have the populations move and the music moves with it. So where the early blues, classic blues, Delta blues, country blues, country and Delta blues were really more rural folk traditions. Classic blues was more like in the nightclubs, and you'll learn about that. And then as they move to the cities, this is where you get to what we call urban blues, and you're going to learn about Chess Records. So you're going to start to learn about independent record labels, Chess Records, and then Sun Records, and you'll learn about others as well. And then technology also has a big role. So you're going to learn about, and I want you actually to think about that up until maybe 150 years ago, all music, for all intents and purposes, was live. It was either played by others and you listened to it, or you played it yourself and people got together. But when recordings started to show up in the late 1800s, things started to shift a little bit. And then they really started to settle in the early 1900s with 78. So I'll do a little, bumped that, quick little show and tell. So the first really mass produced, easily accessible recording, and this thing is falling apart. This is a 78. So a 78 means it revolves at 78 revolutions per minute, RPM. These were originally made out of shellac, which comes from beetles, not the band, but the bug. And they're super, super fragile. This is a very old record. Youngsters often call them vinyls. Vinyl is a material, so it's not really what you want to call them, because that's just the material that we're making of. It'd be like calling a can of Coke aluminums. You get what I mean, right? But I'm not going to change the culture there. But this never was vinyl. This was shellac. But this is a 78. Typically could have just a couple minutes on each side. That's a pretty quick revolution. In the late 1940s is when vinyl started to be used as the material that records were made out of. That's what we called them when I was growing up. This is actually the first record that I bought myself. I still own it. This is Bill Haley and the Comets' Rock Around the Clock, which is a very important song. We'll learn about that you'll learn about it in chapter 4. A 45, it's called a 45, revolves at 45 RPM. Like a 78, basically had one song on each side. So up until the mid 60s, when artists would go into record, they would go into record 45s, singles. The idea was you would record an A side and a B side, both, there's two sides. They'd get it on the radio. The goal, the hope was that it would become popular. And then as an artist, if you got to be popular enough, you had enough hit singles, then they would put it together on an album. So if you think about, now this is what a lot of you will call a vinyl when you think of it proper. We called them either an LP, which was short for a long playing record, revolved at 33 1/3 RPMs, and typically had 5 to 6 songs per side. So this is Jerry Lee Lewis on Sun Records, which was an independent record label. You'll learn about that. So side 1 has 6 songs, side 2 has 5 songs. Up until really the mid 60s, most songs were under 3 minutes long. So if you think about a picture, a photograph, when you put a collection of photographs together, at least in the old days, or you put them, you can do it digitally as well, you would put them together in a photo album. So imagine that with songs. So you would put out your singles, and if you had enough singles that warranted it, you would put them together in an album, a collection of songs. And so this is what you call vinyls, but that's really what it is. Things shifted a lot in the mid 60s, thanks to the Beach Boys and then the Beatles, where the LP really became a big deal. And just so that you know, in terms of the technology, the 45 and the 33, the LP, those came out in 1948. That's when those hit the market commercially. You don't have a lot of changes later. You have 8-track in the 70s, you have cassettes after that, then you get to CDs, 1983, 84, 85, somewhere in there. They really started to become popular in 85. And then eventually you get to DVDs and then MP3s, and all of that's changed. And now, we don't even think about it because it's all streaming, right? Okay, so technology plays a big role. You have it also as a role in recording. So you have tape, reel-to-reel tape, which was a German invention, and even the early microphones were a lot of German technology. You have Les Paul, who really kind of invented the electric guitar, and then Leo Fender, and he also invented multi-tracking. So technology also plays a role. The microphone is crucial and changes the game in the 1930s and 40s, because up until that time, all music was live. And so for a singer to have a voice that would have to carry, that's why you see these sort of big singers. But when the microphone and PA systems came out, speaker systems, then you could have singers like Sinatra, Perry Como, Bing Crosby, that could sing with a softer, different style of voice. And so all of those are going to play factors. You're going to learn about the gospel and country influences that go into getting us to rock and roll proper. And then you're going to learn, and then that'll get us to early rock and roll, which is really, Elvis is the big game changer there. But I want you to understand one more thing. I know this is long. Again, remember, you only have 4 of these. But if you think about, you have ragtime and then you have the blues. Those are 2 different things, and they kind of come together in jazz. But then the blues leads us through to urban blues, which is electric instruments. That's where we start to see electric guitars and small bands playing. And then it becomes a thing where you have like Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Willie Dixon and people like that. And then into that, you start to get rhythm and blues. And rhythm and blues were primarily black styles of music. And there's this racial thing. Radio was divided. Concerts were divided. So there were nightclubs that would have black artists, and there were other nightclubs that had white artists. There were some concert venues where maybe they would do 2 shows in a day, and one show would be for black audiences and another show would be for white audiences. And then later they would put them together, but they would segregate them. Either one would be in the balcony, the other would be downstairs, or there would be ropes. And that started to break down, and Elvis played a big role in that. You're going to learn about the shift from rhythm and blues to rock and roll, and how it's really just a name change, because rhythm and blues had a very strong racial connotation to it that a lot of people did not think highly of. Now, it's simple. It's easy to simplify life and to look back at, say, the 50s and say, oh, everybody was racist back then. That's not true. Everybody wasn't even racist in the 1800s. Many of the leading abolitionists, the anti-slavery people, were white Quakers that were anti-slavery, that from the 1800s and even going back more were against that. There were people against slavery back then, but it was still more of a thing back then than it is now. I fear it's getting worse again, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm hoping that I'm wrong. I think it's just the media trying to have fun with us and play with us. So then you'll learn about rock and roll, and you'll learn about the black predecessors. This would be Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino. Elvis is really the first significant game changer because he breaks down barriers between white audiences and black audiences. In fact, a lot of people, when he was first appeared on the radio, thought that he was black. He wasn't allowed to play certain venues because they assumed he either was black, or when they met him and saw him, they just felt that he sounded too black. But Elvis really brought those things together and then blew the doors wide open with which allowed people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, Carl Perkins, that maybe never would have had entrance into that. You'll learn about Sam Phillips and Sun Records and the role that played as well. So I know this is a long video. I know that it rambles a bit, but I'm just trying to set the context for you. Now, every week in this class, you're going to have this welcome video, and you have to get through this before the other modules start to do it. So it's important that you hit these on Mondays. Get to these whenever you can, Monday morning, Monday night, whatever. It will then sequentially unlock. There's a quiz in every module, and then the assignments open up, but they are based on things that you're learning. In some ways more than others. And then you'll have your tests, and there's also a concert report. So you're going to need to be mindful of that concert report, because it's all going to be here before we know it. I think that's enough for now. I know this was long. There were no cool commercial breaks. I don't know if YouTube breaks these things up into ads. I hope not, but maybe they do. Anyways, that's it. Please reach out if you have questions, because it's going to go quickly. Oh, one thing, your class discussion, even though it shows your due date as Sunday, your initial post is due on Thursday, okay? So you have to have an initial post done on by the end of the day on Thursday. And these assignments have to be done by noon on Thursdays, okay? These video assignments. So, yeah, you're watching it, so you should be good. Okay, that's it. Maybe I'll see some of you tonight, Monday night. Otherwise, have a great week. Reach out if you have questions. Thanks. Bye.